Good morning, everybody. Here we are. It's another day and a beautiful morning at Gettysburg 161. You're with the American Battlefield Trust, and we are getting ready to embark on, hopefully, if the creek don't rise and all that stuff, we're going to be covering the first day, finishing up the first day, covering the town of Gettysburg, and then on a really long walk. I'm Gary Edelman, that's Chris White behind the camera. We got Sarah K. Byerly with us. We got Tim Smith waiting in the wings. We might have a couple other guests along the way. We really hope you enjoy this and you share this with your friends. Before I even forget, click that subscribe button on YouTube so you can see all of our videos, and make sure you share this video with your friends. I think you already know where you are. We're at General Robert E. Lee's headquarters. His headquarters complex was spewed about this place, and the members and supporters of the American Battlefield Trust have worked so hard to preserve and restore and interpret this place. And if you scroll a little bit over before we leave, Chris, you'll be able to see there's going to be a tour here. We're not even leading it. Battlefield guides come here. The Seminary Ridge Foundation comes here. The park uses it for open doors history. So we're really happy about that. With no further ado, we're going to start walking. That is the Thompson House there, and we're going to cross one of the 10 roads that led into Gettysburg. We crossed it yesterday too, the Chambersburg Pike. Let's see what felicity we have in crossing here. We'll go a little silent while we focus on keeping each other safe. While we're waiting here, somebody commented yesterday on one of our videos that Robert Rhodes, if there's ever a movie that includes him, he should be played by Ryan Reynolds. We're curious to know who should play some of the major characters we talk about today. So if we talk about A.P. Hill or Richard Ewell or George Gordon Meade, who would play them in a major Hollywood movie? Now, let me, with no further ado, now that we've crossed the road, bring on the official Adams County historian, Adams County Historical Society historian as well, Tim Smith here. Tim, you're one of your favorite places. I know you love Seminary Ridge. What do you got?
Yeah, there's many reasons why I'm really interested in the fighting that occurred on Seminary Ridge. And of course, we're just walking by the James Henry Thompson House. He was in the Army at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, but his wife gave birth to a child on June 30th, 1863. And of course, I like to refer to that as one of the battle babies. But Seminary Ridge, which of course this area we're walking through, is owned by American Battlefield Trust, and we're walking towards the Lutheran Seminary campus. This area is probably the scene of the heaviest fighting of the entire Battle of Gettysburg that is sort of on private property that's not part of the national park. And I would argue that the afternoon of the first day doesn't really get as much attention as some of the other aspects of the battle. One, because it's on private property. Two, because the Northern Army was defeated, and amongst the Northern veterans, probably the least said about this fight, the better. And it's just, it's one of the most confusing areas of the fighting. But basically, on the afternoon of the first day, after the heavy fighting in the early afternoon, the Northern Army fell back to a final defensive position along this ridge. And of the regiments that were involved here for the 1st Army Corps, all of them had been in the battle, and many of them had lost more than half of their men. And about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this line of battle, now with artillery, was about to be attacked by a fresh Confederate division. Of course, William Dorsey Pender. And Scales Brigade and Perrin, South Carolina Brigade would hit this area that we're walking through. And in a matter of minutes, the Union line collapsed and retreated through town. Of course, near the same time, there was heavy fighting north of the town, and the 11th Corps of the Northern Army was driven back. And as the Northern Army was driven off this ridge and across these open fields, the Southern Army closed in on them, according to the Union accounts, creating a gauntlet of fire.
Ooh, you've always liked a gauntlet.
Oh, and it's just, I think what happens is when people are touring the battlefield, they spend a lot of time on the morning of the first day, and by the time they get back to this area, little of this fighting is discussed, but it is some of the most intense fighting in the entire battle. There's a fight between the 151st Pennsylvania and the 14th South Carolina out in these fields in front of the Lutheran Theological Seminary. And there's a great account where the South Carolinians come around the seminary building with bayonets on both sides of it.
Can I pause for a second? A, Chris has been walking backward for about a quarter of a mile here, and B, we're about to approach the seminary here. And I just want to zoom back because a lot of people, they might know the Battle of Gettysburg, but they really don't understand this first day thing. So let me make sure I'm getting this straight, Tim, okay? On the morning of July 1st, here comes General Heath's division sort of from the west, and here comes Ewell's division from the north. That's a generality, right?
Sure.
And to counter them, the Union 1st and 11th Corps, smaller in number, are there. And what you're saying is that those two Confederate divisions, with the help of now Jubal Early's division, are going to pinch her around, and literally the sides are coming together almost to the Chambersburg Pike, where the
Yes.
Union is running back to town where we'll be walking today.
With the addition now of William Dorsey Pender's division
course.
arriving and adding weight to Heath's attack.
So 4 Confederate divisions, totally maybe 28,000 soldiers fighting 2 Union Corps, which is not all on the field, maybe 18,000.
And generally, I like to say because again, it's easier for people to generalize. On the first day of the battle, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 20,000 Northern soldiers were overwhelmed by 30,000 Southerners and driven through the town that had a population of about 2,000.
Good, good. And I'm seeing as we start walking again, man, New York has come out strong this morning. Like all the other lives we've done, it's been like England and Thailand and Korea. Here comes New York, out up early, ready to engage with Gettysburg 161. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're trying to do a long walk as we go around the Lutheran Theological Seminary and the Seminary Ridge Museum, which interprets the first day of the battle. Some civilian stuff as well as some medical stuff as well. So Tim, what else you got before we meet some other friends?
Well, you know, one of my favorite paintings of the fighting is Baxter's Brigade versus Iverson that is featured on a large panel in the Lutheran Seminary Museum. And of course, that battle you talked about yesterday that occurred up near the Eternal Light Peace Memorial. But I have often tried to imagine what it must have been like to be a Union soldier retreating in this direction and having the South Carolinians charge around the seminary at you. And Abner Doubleday was here somewhere close by at that moment. And you might know he threw his headquarters guard out to the Hagerstown Road to try to stem the tide of some of this attack, and they were overwhelmed. And
Tim is crowding the camera, man. Stop walking toward Chris.
we are on the Tanbark Pathway,
Wow.
as it was known early on in the history of the town.
Let me just say that, I mean, nobody can go and take a word as rote and really just banal, I guess I'll say, as Tanbark, and give such importance to it, the Tanbark Pathway.
Yeah. So we call it that because it was made out of bark that was left over from the tanning process. And this walkway was here at the time of the battle. And today, of course, it stops down there at Hay Street, but it went all the way to the Chambersburg Pike at the time. And this pathway led to the Lutheran Theological Seminary, and quite possibly could have been the route which General Reynolds rode around if he could get around the cattle guard there to get here.
Well, let's take a look at that cattle guard. We have a couple of our friends again. We've got Dane, we've got Mike, National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg. Dane, what does Mike have here as Chris makes his way over to show what's on the end of the Tanbark Pathway?
So we have a model, all right, a 1867 W.H. Tipton stereo view of the back of Schmucker Hall, and you have that cattle guard right prominently centered in the middle of that photograph, and the wall is off to the side of it.
Good. So, Tim, what are you seeing in that photo? You know this photo well.
Well, you know, I think this is more common in Europe where you travel over a lot of fences, that they put it's like a stairway that you climb up and over the area of the fence, but it also keeps the cows in. And, you know, I think Daniel Skelly, in his civilian account, and he meets Reynolds on the road, suggested perhaps Reynolds comes all the way up to Chambersburg Pike and comes across the seminary. But we walked down the roadway, and it's there's no evidence there was a roadway there on the backside of the seminary at the time.
And why wouldn't he take the most direct route
And
up?
why wouldn't he take the most direct route or come in the other direction? And of course, you know, in the movie Gettysburg, there's a great scene where Reynolds and his staff come riding across this tan bark path. Now, I do believe that there are fences along the tan bark path, so it might have been kind of difficult. There had to be some way to get in here and around this.
Yes, exactly. And what's interesting, of course, is that this is a post-war photograph. All of them, essentially, are
Yes.
post-battle photographs, so we have to take
So
that into
the
account.
fences are repaired.
Yeah, so let me add one more thing because our friends have one other thing to share with us. Remember, we're on the east side of the Lutheran Theological Seminary behind us. Again, great museum inside there. But this is part of the area. If you imagine South Carolinians coming around the building here and literally going toward the pike to try to trap Union soldiers. And all these Union soldiers that had formed a defensive position on Seminary Ridge, we're talking about like Stone's Brigade. We're talking about part of Biddle's Brigade. We're talking about a lot of cannons. They're all fleeing here. And among those fleeing regiments is the 151st Pennsylvania, known as the School Teachers Regiment. We might talk about them later, but what do you got, Dane?
So we have a carte de visite photograph of Lafayette Westbrook, one of the captains of the 151st Pennsylvania. He was a captain of Company B, and he was from Pike County, way up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And Westbrook, unlike some other members of the regiment, was not a school teacher. He was a member of the Pennsylvania legislature prior to his commission. And this photograph was taken by a photographer in Harrisburg, may have very possibly been his legislative photograph. But he chaired the Committee on Railroads before the start of the war, came into Gettysburg with the unit logging 170 miles and marching in less than 3 weeks. And Westbrook did this all with a lame right foot and rheumatism on his left side, shoulder, and neck. So he'd fight the battle here at Gettysburg. Can you guys imagine having to fight a battle like that with a lame foot and rheumatism? But he would return then with the regiment following the battle, and those ailments would continue to plague him. He would seek out a doctor in Milford, Pennsylvania, up in Pike County, and eventually draw a $20 a month invalid pension. In 1864, he would be drafted. His 9-month term of service did not exempt him from the draft, so what did he do? He hired a substitute for $600 to serve in his place. And then he would also marry after the war as well, end up dying in 1908. January 1908.
All right, good. Thanks, Dane. I got one more question for you before we depart. We'll see you a little bit later, but if somebody found it a little too hot in Gettysburg tomorrow and say they wanted to come visit the museum, are you open tomorrow?
Oh, yes. We're open 7 days a week from 10 to 5 p.m., and then on Sundays we're open 12 to 5.
Good, good. We'll see you later. We'll let you do a little bit more of a promo. Thanks, guys. See you later. Let's keep walking again. I want to just say that, you know, today, if you had trouble with your neck and a bum right foot, I mean, you're destined. You're that person that's going to park 4 spots away from where you have to go. You might hit the drive-through. This guy is hitting the battlefield, participating in the largest or costliest battle of the entire Civil War. Now, we're heading a little bit further south, and I know Chris is going to have a photo to show of the seminary, but before we get there, Tim, what you got going on?
Well, a couple things from here I should point out. One of them is in July of 1863, late July, perhaps early August, the Tyson brothers of Gettysburg shot a 2-plate panorama from the top of Seminary Ridge, not far to our south, looking towards the town of Gettysburg at the time. And that image is valuable to historians in that we can make extreme blow-ups of it and we can see the appearance of the different buildings in the town, and it really helps us understand what the town looked like at the time.
Good.
Also, one other thing I wanted to mention here as we're walking out down this path to the Chambersburg Turnpike, that there are modern buildings off to our north along the Chambersburg Turnpike, but at the time of the battle, besides the Carey Sheed's house, that area was much more open. And right behind the Chambersburg Turnpike, a short distance, is the unfinished railroad embankment. And as the Northern armies were retreating on the first day's battle, many of them want to take refuge from this inflating fire put on them by the South Carolinians that have swung around the seminary building and are firing across the Chambersburg Pike, and they retreat onto the other side of the unfinished railroad embankment, only to discover that Dole's brigade has started its way across the Gettysburg College campus from the northern area fighting against the 11th Corps, and now they're firing into them from the other side of the embankment. And again, there's like 7 firsthand accounts that all describe this as a gauntlet. And you know, most of those accounts are not copying off of each other, so it just seems like there was an opportunity here for the Southerners to completely surround and destroy a large portion of the Northern Army. There's a great account that Harry Hayes of the Louisiana Brigade finds himself at near the center of the town along the railroad on Carlisle Street, and he can swing around and cut off all these troops. But there's so many of them, and it's such a massive retreat that he pulls back and kind of just lets them all go. And you wonder, if you have 10 guys, are you going to be able to capture 100 guys retreating? That's kind of what it's like.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've set me up for what I actually wanted to say here, Tim. By the way, we know we're having some trouble with the feed. It'll all catch up, so we're going to keep on shooting here, which is just fine. But, you know, we're trying to show as much of the battlefield as possible, and here we are walking through town, and that is because town is the battlefield too, right, Tim?
You know, and again, it's one of those things where, because the town is private, and also because the Northern Army are the ones preserving the battlefield early on, the Northern veterans, and the North lost the first day's fighting, there isn't much discussion about the fighting in the town or the preservation of the town as part of the battlefield early on. And that, of course, is carried on through to this day.
And I would say that Chris just went and looked back up the pike to show that A, Seminary Ridge is a real deal ridge, and B, it also showed one of my top 2 Mexican restaurants in town. There are 5 that you can check out, and people really have a strong opinion of their favorite. I'll just say that Montezuma's...
I like Blessings.
Yeah, and Blessings, I think, has the best flavor in town. Montezuma's is quick, relatively cheap, and you never suffer ill effect despite the name. So what we're doing is mimicking both the Union retreat and the Confederate advance. And I understand, Tim, that some of it was very orderly for the Union, depending on the unit, and some of it was absolute chaos.
That's right. I think the first units to retreat through the town did it in some order and tried to keep their unit in some kind of semblance. And as the retreat broke down, in the later stages of the retreat, it was chaos, and men were overrun and captured in the town. Now, I've been one who has been accused of overestimating the number of men that were captured in the first day's fighting. I say all the time, people are saying, well, don't you think you're exaggerating a little bit? But you know what? If you count all the Northern soldiers that were wounded and in hospitals, then, you know, that captured figure actually becomes a lot greater, because we have a tendency to count men who are wounded as not being captured.
Well, let's, you know, then come out with your number, Tim. 200, 2,000, 5,000, what do you got?
Well, again, you know, it's going to be really hard to say, because, but it is definitely like 3,000, and I guess depending on how you count, you know, it could be as great as 4,000 or 5,000.
Good. So yeah, I had to throw, excuse the term, the gauntlet down in order to get you to commit to a number there, Tim.
And you know, I'm definitely one who doesn't like to commit to any strict facts, because I understand the flow, and especially in counting numbers.
Well, it's good to know that the Adams County official historian doesn't want to commit to strict facts.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who picked up on that.
That's good. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. This stream will catch up eventually, and we're happy to have you with us as we walk down the Chambersburg Pike toward the town square. We're still some blocks away. Who knows, we might cut this feed and start anew, hoping to get a better connectivity, but we're going to continue to just stick with it for a bit as we go by what used to be Baker's, then Dunlop's, and now the Federal Point restaurant as we head toward the Federal Point Inn. one of the sort of boutique hotels in Gettysburg. Gettysburg's come a long way in the last couple of decades, hasn't it?
Yes. You're thinking Glenn's Restaurant, Glenn's Diner, and Sunny Ray's also added to
Sunny
those.
Ray's, wow, who remembers that? Put that in the comments there. But you know,
this is turning into the Gary Edelman Historic Food Tour of Gettysburg. So, what other recommendations do we have for eating around here, Gary?
well, I think that's great, you know, so we're going to pass by a lot of them, and because I mentioned 1 or 2 or 3 doesn't mean to the exclusion of all others, but we find ourselves eating a lot at Fourscore Brewery, where they have a limited but excellent menu and good beer. We also like Sign of the Buck, a whole lot more of an upscale experience, for sure. Of course, the Dobbin House and the Farnsworth House both have excellent and historic food that you can't just get at every other place. Tim, what am I forgetting?
Wow.
Tim's only
That's funny
supposed to
that
talk about the Farnsworth House because he's sort of married into it.
Oh, what I wanted to talk about here, though, of course, is we're going by the Federal Point Inn, which originally, I believe, built in 1896, is the Meade School. So our town respects the honor of the greatest general in American history by naming our school after him. I don't know how many other George Gordon Meade schools there are in the United States, but here's one right here.
Good. So, by the way, I want to channel my inner Tim here. Chris, I know you're going to look into the sun, but there's a few things going on here. We've got the 26th Emergency Regiment here, and to the right further, we got the site, not the actual building, but the site of John Burns, the hero of Gettysburg's house over there. So there's a lot to see at this intersection. Unfortunately, it's busy. People tend to not stop here. So first on John Burns, he's known as the only civilian to come out and defend the town. You could argue about that, but that he's the hero of Gettysburg and very well known afterward, there is no arguing with. See our video from yesterday that will eventually actually upload. We haven't done that yet. But as to the 26th Emergency Regiment, Tim, come here. You said something interesting on a video recently because people argue about whether or not the 26th Emergency Regiment, these are like local boys and things like that, whether they could stand against a veteran regiment, and did they slow down Jubal Early's troops when they came here on June 26th? But you said something very interesting. Maybe they did not only slow them down, but...
Yeah, in a speech given during a dedication ceremony, one of the members of the unit, who was later the governor of Pennsylvania, suggested that the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment slowed the Southern attack on Harrisburg down. And I believe that because the Southern Army were chasing the 26th Emergency Regiment, and because they ran so quickly, they actually sped up the Confederate advance on Harrisburg, not slowed it down.
Well, I think that's really interesting. Did you just come up with that this year, or have you felt that way for a while?
That's something I've been feeling for a long time.
Okay, good. Well, I think, we've got a few more blocks to walk. The feed is messed up, it'll catch up, but I just as soon reset this thing, and we're gonna conclude this thing now and go into another video. So Tim, any parting shots?
I just think that the area that we're in and the amount of heavy fighting that occurred in this area is often overlooked by visitors and historians, and I wish that people would give it a little more attention.
Good. Is there a place in town where people can learn more about the town and the civilian experience?
Of course, you can go to the Adams County Historical Society and see our Gettysburg Beyond the Battle Museum, where we talked about the impact of the battle on the civilians, and our Caught in the Crossfire experience actually highlights a building at the edge of the town on July 1st as the Northern Army is retreating around it and the Southern Army are advancing on the town.
Okay, well, let me just assure you all that we work really hard, and no one at the Trust more than Chris White behind the camera to ensure that we're as prepared as possible for tech challenges in the field, but we just do the best we can. There's a lot of people streaming. So thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting battlefield education and preservation. Thanks to the guests we have. We'll go live again as soon as we can.